Welcome back, everybody. We're on to Unit 2, which is actually our official kickoff to the material of the course. Very happy to see everybody jump in with their introductions. Thank you very much for that. I now know that some of you would save every penny of that 10,000 and others would put it on black or red and spin the wheel. There is no right or wrong answer to that. I know what I would do, but I'm me and you are you, and doing those introductions help me get to know you and how you think a little bit better. Just a word of caution. I know some have taken in fact, everyone has taken the syllabus quiz, and I appreciate that. But I also know that some of you didn't read the syllabus or do the lecture that explained the syllabus when you took the quiz and copped the 5 points. You still get the 5 points, but just understand that if you run into a problem during the semester and it was in the syllabus, you're still responsible for it. So let your conscience be your guide and do what you want to do on that. So let's jump in, and this week you've hopefully read. If you haven't, please stop now and go back and read the Kent Howard article on Enterprise Security Risk Management. And we're going to talk the first half of this term about ESRM in some fashion, because an important part of security management is getting to know who's who in the zoo, as they say, who you're going to partner with, who you're going to work with, and what they think and what they do. And so this, in a way, is a bit of just a general business course in that regard as to how an organization is set up and the different parts of it and what they do in a common, everyday, non-specialized company or organization, but through the view and the eyes of the security manager. And hopefully this will give you the insight when you take that first job and you get there the first week, you kind of know what everybody does. It's a very scary thing, that first job. I remember it. You'll get there and you'll say, gosh, I'd really like to know a little bit about what everybody does before I get there, so I kind of understand when they tell me they're the head of HR or they're the head of finance, how that may impact me. We all think we know what those folks do, but there are some nuances to those jobs we'll talk about. And also how you as a security manager can be more successful when you understand those folks and partner with them. So let's just dive right in. So ESRM, Enterprise Security Risk Management. I'm going to read this. I seldom read the slides, but let me do this. The application of fundamental risk principles to manage all security risks, whether related to information, cyber, physical security, asset management, or business continuity, in a comprehensive, holistic, all-encompassing approach. That really reads nicely. It's very sing-songy, and it gives me warm fuzzies just reading that. But what does that really mean? So in common everyday English, that means we're looking at security from a blank page. We're considering all the moving parts of an organization. So it's very common for especially a physical security manager to say, okay, I'm going to be the security manager, so I have to worry about putting in alarm systems and putting up cameras and getting guards. But we don't think about really what we're protecting. Or if we do it through our own lens. Well, I'm protecting the perimeter, or I'm protecting the research lab, or I'm protecting the manufacturing space or the dock. But we don't understand why, and that gives us a very generic security program that has a lot of holes in it. And ESRM is a way to plug those holes so that you really are protecting what's important to you, and what's important to you is important to the organization. So you're considering all the moving parts. You're applying the best tools to address a specific risk. So, the best tool may not be guards. It may be something electronic. It may not be electronics. It may be something physical. It may be cameras as opposed to an alarm. It may be cameras with artificial intelligence that will help you determine who went where when, because you need it for a forensic kind of a look at something. But it gives you the idea of the best tools to address a certain risk. And you'll understand your partner's needs and the threats to the business, the real threats to the business. You can't possibly know those. And I'll give you some examples of how that is absolutely true. So how does this influence the security manager? And it's really important. The role that security and the security manager plays is to work as a subject matter expert to enable the enterprise to manage security risk. Now, what does that mean? It means that I, as a security manager, am a subject matter expert in methods of protection, be it cyber or be it physical. That is what I do. I am not an expert in what the risks to the business are. I can't possibly be an expert in what the risk to a business is, because only those people who own those assets that have risk really know how important it is to them. So what this does, what ESRM really does, is it shifts the risk identification to those who it is most important to. You can't know what's important to someone else. They have to tell you that. And I will give you a great example because it's time for story time. I don't know if I should start these with once upon a time because you might go to sleep, so I won't. But it's story time. This story is called There's Gold in Them There Hills, which I think is a quote from an old Western movie. A few years back, I received a call from a security manager at a site that I had oversight for. And unfortunately, what he started off with, the police are just leaving, which is never what you want to hear as someone who has oversight for a security program. You want to hear the police are on their way, perhaps, or you don't even want to hear that, but at least you want to know before they're coming and what they're going to possibly encounter. But what I got was the police have just left. So, okay, we had a theft, a major theft. Okay, what was stolen? Gold dust. Now, I work in pharmaceuticals, and gold dust is nothing I'd ever really encountered before. But come to find out that gold can be refined to a pharmaceutical grade that attaches itself to certain compounds, and it was being used as a test to see if certain vaccine materials could attach to gold. I guess it's vaccines. Again, I'm not a scientist, so bear with me. Proof more that we need, yes, sorry. But the gold would attach to certain chemicals, and it's the best carrier of those chemicals into the bloodstream. And this was very refined gold, so extremely clean. We're not talking 14, 24 karat. We're talking about purest of gold. I said, okay. I didn't realize we had that. And the security manager said, neither did I. I said, how much was stolen? He said, about $750,000 worth of gold dust. That's a fair amount of a loss. That's a big theft from a individual operating site anywhere. And the fact that it was gold dust, which normally someone would think is pretty, pretty easy to, pretty liquid, right? You can sell it. This particular gold dust, come to find out, wasn't as easy to sell because it had a particular fingerprint, if you will, because it was so pure it raised all kinds of red flags. But we're talking about gold dust in the equivalent of what looked like baby food jars, stored in a file cabinet with a broken lock. Now, the bottom line was, I could have protected that gold dust much, much better. Could have put a vault in, a vault with a camera and an alarm on the door and motion sensing, made sure that that safe or that vault had the proper protection for tools and fires and explosives so that nobody could get in to get to this gold. And by the way, the $750,000 was not, by any stretch, all of the gold that was taken. It was just a small sampling of what was available. And so the moral of the story is that the security manager didn't think to ask research and development, hey, what have you got as far as precious metals? Because no one would think that you're making drugs, right? You're making medicines that you would have gold. And come to find out we had platinum as well. So the moral of the story is if you don't ask, they won't tell. As the security manager, I could not do anything to mitigate that risk of loss of $750,000 in one theft, and could have been much, much more, because I didn't know it was there to protect. The person who is the security manager of the bank understands there's cash and you have to protect the cash. But I would have never thought there'd been gold, and neither did the security manager. So the moral of the story is if you don't get the partners, the other businesses at your location, in your organization involved in assessing the risk, you may never know it's there. So who are some of these partners? Well, HR is definitely a partner. They have a risk in bad hiring. I mean, I know that right off the chute, right? HR is normally responsible for the onboarding of newly hired employees. A manager will select someone with the help of HR, and they will hire someone. And HR will onboard that person, and they will do a background check. Well, if HR has a risk of doing bad background checks because they're not getting the proper information, they may make a bad hire. A bad hire is one of your worst enemies as a security manager, be you in the cyber or physical space, right? Bad actors, internal threats are definitely a problem for us. So you want to partner with HR. EH&S. In my case, there was a risk to chemicals. But on another story time coming up, I'll give you another risk that maybe you hadn't thought of. R&D, well, they have some very odd things in their cupboard, like gold and platinum, and there are more things. R&D in a place like, say, Apple may very well have precious metals, because there are precious metals in those types of devices, right? The old devices had mercury in them. I don't know if they still do. There's probably some silver in these things. Gold could be used in those as well. It's not just metals though, but there are very odd things in research and development for any company and any product that you just wouldn't necessarily think of. There's a risk in the supply chain to raw material delivery and distribution channels, but I don't know what raw material has the longest lead time necessarily of the products I'm making. So if you were working in, let's say you work for Mattel and you're the security manager, and Mattel's biggest product as of, I think a week ago I saw it, they're still their biggest product is Barbie, right? So they have the plastic to make Barbie, and they have the paints, and they have the machinery to put it together, but Barbie has hair, right? And that hair is made of something. And let's just say that something disrupted the supply chain and they couldn't get the hair. You're not going to sell a lot of bald Barbies. It doesn't work that way, right? So the supply chain risk could very well be that we need to make sure that we put the material that we use for the hair under a little bit higher level of security, because if something happens to it, then we're out of business because it takes so long to get it. Just an example. Certainly IT, there's risk to information loss, compromise of production systems. We may not always understand automation. We work in a factory perhaps, and things are automated, and there are computer systems that control that automation, and a lot of times companies don't put those into a server farm somewhere or into a big computer room. They're closer to the operation. For various reasons, they may be a computer or a server that sits in the department that operates the big machine. And the big machine is what that department does. It makes things on the big machine. And the server that controls it sits in the department. Well, I need to protect that from harm and from abuse and from someone doing harm to it. But if I don't know it's there, and I don't know how important it is, I can't help. And certainly finance, the loss of assets or capital, the finance people and fraud majors will understand this. They understand where the weak points are in any system. But as a non-finance major, I do not. And therefore, partnering with finance can help you understand what's important. And you'll learn an awful lot about your business when you do this process. But it really is getting people together to understand what the risks of each one of them are. So, time for another story. So we'll call this one a shocking development. When I sat with the head of EHS at a particular site to determine what that person thought their highest risks were, I thought it would be the chemicals. And that was high on the list, right? We were in a chemical type plant, right? But one of the risks they had, they thought was important to note, were the defibrillators that hung on the wall in case someone in the factory had a heart attack. And there were, I think, 37 or 40 units of these hanging in various parts of this factory. It was a decent-sized factory. And they hung in cabinets. And they're rather expensive. I mean, not over-the-top expensive. I think they were $5,000 or $6,000 a piece. But, again, try to find a buyer, right? So not that much of a theft in that regard. But what I didn't understand until I had this conversation was the batteries in those were lithium batteries. Now, I don't know how much you know about the methamphetamine trade, but there are Smurfs that go around to pharmacies all the time to pick up their Sudafed and the lithium batteries to, for the old-style method of making meth. And they'll get the lithium batteries into little coin-sized batteries, right? And they will steal them or they will buy them. But one defibrillator, that's a lot of juice in there. That battery is rather large, and it will save you an awful lot of time going to steal the little batteries if you can get a hold of one defib machine. I would have never thought that anyone would steal those for the lithium. But indeed, that particular safety manager related that in the town they were in, which was in a part of the country that had a rather large methamphetamine problem, although I don't know if there's a part of the country that doesn't anymore, had lost 2. And those 2 were eventually found, busted apart, and the batteries were gone. So it's not always as it appears. If you don't have these conversations, you just can't happen upon this information. You need to partner with people during this enterprise security risk management scenario. During this process, it's all about meeting with people, partnering, and understanding what their risk is. So the steps in an ESRM model really are to identify the partners, and you need to consider anybody that could have any kind of impact on risk evaluation for your location or your company or your site, if you will, right? Don't just think, okay, well, I need to talk to HR and I need to talk to finance. Those are always people that you want to have on the list, but think about who else might. Operations, obviously. Transportation and distribution and shipping, receiving, obviously. I mean, they have certain risks that they're concerned about, things that come in that are very valuable. They need to lock them up, but they may just have them with the rest of the packages that come in, and they sit on a dock overnight, and you come in the next day, and along with the couple of monitors that are missing is also that box with gold dust in it, right? So you need to consider all the partners. Don't be afraid to shoot too high or too low. Could be somebody that's not a vice president level that has the information you need, or it could be somebody above that level that has the information you need. Find the partners. Don't be concerned about whether they're high in the organization or low. If they're too high and they don't want to be involved with the process, they will delegate somebody. And if they're too low in the organization, then they just need to talk to their boss, and someone will be assigned higher. Okay, so now you're going to assess and order the risks. You're going to get everybody in the organization that you have chosen to give you their top 3 or 4 risks. What are the 3 or 4 things that are definitely under your control that keep you awake at night? What are the things that might be stolen, destroyed, otherwise impaired, and you won't be able to recover and do your job the next day? There are certain things in just about every operating unit that have that level of importance to someone. Okay? So you're going to ask each one of them for the risks. Then you're going to put that list together. You're going to see where there's overlap, right? There are some things that are of concern to 3 or 4 people. Similar things. Well, we need to understand those things, and those should be priorities because they're encompassing a lot of your organization. And you need to do this at least annually, in my opinion. A risk evaluation, an enterprise security risk evaluation, annually minimum. And you need to continually look for new partners and determine if some partners don't need to be there anymore. If their risk doesn't fluctuate, if it's very, very static, then maybe they don't need to be involved every year, and you may have new people that you want to involve. From that list of things that you have, you're going to define a vision that's applicable to everybody. Okay? So, if you have a problem where everybody thinks that something might be stolen by somebody from the outside because it has value, then obviously you want to protect your perimeter, not let people in. So maybe you need an access control system on the perimeter of your building so that you can have some guarantee that only those who are allowed in get in, right? You also want to take that risk and you want to say, what do I already have in place? So in the case of the defibrillator, I already had an alarm system, right? I had alarmed doors in that particular site that went back to a central monitoring station that would dispatch a guard to see what was going on. Well, how hard was it to put alarm contacts on the doors of those defib cabinets? Every one of them was in a cabinet with a glass front on it. And then we routed those alarms through the system to go to the cell phone and the text message to the safety manager as well, because not only did they want to know when someone went in one of those to make sure nothing was stolen, but gosh, wouldn't you want to know if you were the safety manager that somebody just popped open a defib cabinet? I mean, that pretty much tells me that, number one, either somebody's playing around, somebody's stealing, or somebody's having a heart attack, and I'd really want to know what any of those 3 were doing. And so we had the alarm system routed not only to bring a guard in response to see what was happening, but also to alert the safety manager and the occupational health person, the company nurse, if you will, so that they could respond as well. So we used existing measures to fit that vision of protecting those devices. So that's ESRM kind of in a nutshell. But I want to jump into one more story time here for you, because I think this one can really put it in perspective about how these conversations can go when you meet with these partners. And we'll be discussing the partners individually over the course of the next several weeks and what they might bring to the table. And we call this one, a nice leisurely swim can ruin someone's weekend. So I was in Ireland, in Cork, Ireland, actually a little town called Ringaskiddy, cute little town. And I was meeting with the site leader, the vice president in charge of that operating location. And that operating location made one product, sildenafil. And for those who are not scientists, sildenafil is the active ingredient in a drug called Viagra. And if you don't know what Viagra is or what it does, look it up, please. So this was the only place in the world, when Viagra was a patented product, where sildenafil was made. Single product plant, single location to make it, and we made a lot of it. Warehouses full of this powder in 50 kilo drums. And when I went to visit with the site leader to talk to him about ESRM, to give him the list of the things that his charges, the EHS manager, the HR manager, the finance manager, several others, the operations people, the shipping, receiving, what they had come up with, I wanted to sit with him once I took care of the overlap and say, okay, which of these do you think is important to you, since you're responsible for the entire operation? And he looked me in the eye, and with his great Irish accent, which I love Irish accents, he said, I'm more concerned about my retention pond. And I asked him why. And he said, because I have, and when I look down this list of things that could keep us from making sildenafil, I will tell you that I have a stockpile here that is good for about 6 months. And if anything happened to any of these resources that people list as potential risk points, I could have myself up and running long before then and make more. Sure, I'd lose some time, sure, I'd lose some product, but I wouldn't miss a beat as far as delivery. But I have a retention pond that sits on the edge of my property, and the local children like to climb the fence and swim in it. And the local constable has told me one more time that a child jumps the fence and swims in there and creates a risk to their life, they're going to shut me down until I take proper precautions to secure that retention pond. Now, I would have never thought that. I don't think anybody would have thought that in a plant that made the active ingredient for one of the best selling products in the world, and it was, I think we were selling about 5 billion, 6 billion a year at that point. It was the only place it was being made. His concern was not about the product. It was not about the raw materials he had stacked. It was not about the machinery or the people or the formulas or the IT infrastructure used for the automation. It was the retention pond. And then we would have never known that had we not had that conversation. And of course, the next day we set together a project to properly secure that with infrared sensors and actually these microwave sensors around that particular retention pond, and proper fencing, and met with the city council to let them know what we were going to do, and let them have input into the type of fencing we used so it looked pretty. And we used it in a state fence with a ridge top on it. So basically it looked like a really nice estate metal iron fence, but if you tried to climb over the top of it, you were going to know that those points on the top weren't just for show. But we would have never known had we not had the conversation. And ESRM, in a nutshell, is really about having those conversations, because you can't know what the risks are. So Kent Howard's article, which I really, really like, and if any of you would have questions for Kent, please let me know. Actually, I'm working with him now. I'm writing a review on one of his papers for something called Great Conversations. And he's really a fantastic guy, and would love to answer your questions if you have any. And he didn't come up with this, but I think he's got one of the best writings on it that makes it really kind of an aha moment for most people. But when he talks about the elements of the program, there's the plan. Those are the conversations. Okay, we're planning. We're understanding what the risks are, and we're diving deep to find out what the risks to the organization are. Then we're going to build, and we're going to understand what elements we already have in place, what protection devices we may have, and what policies we may need. Don't forget the soft elements, right? A policy that says you will do things in a certain way can really help your security, right? So you're going to build. Then you're going to monitor. You're going to put those things in effect, and you're going to look at intelligence. You're going to get partner feedback. You're going to look at the differences. Were there any attacks or any attempts on any of these items? Have you minimized the loss if there was loss in the past? Have you reduced it in any way? And then you adjust. You respond. You go back and you say, okay, what have we done that's new? What isn't as important as it used to be? There was one time in history, I'm sure, where if you had saddle soap, you were probably going to be a very rich person, because everybody had a horse and everybody wanted saddle soap for their saddle. That's not really a big seller anymore. And at some point, for you cyber folks, because you love gadgets, let's look at the BlackBerry. Everybody had to have a BlackBerry at one point. And I don't know anybody that carries one today, although I know they are still around, I think. A Canadian-based company, I think they still have devices out there. But things change, right? So, the software that controlled the BlackBerry was something that you needed huge protections on in the past. Now, is it really worth it? Because nobody's carrying one, right? So you adjust. This gives you what's called a continuous improvement model in ESRM. You are constantly planning, then building, then monitoring, and then responding, going back and looking again whether or not your plan is correct, then going back through the circle. It is a continuous process so that you know that your program is always fresh and always ready to address any risk. So staying relevant is really one of the big challenges. If you do this once and you go through the process, you will have a great program. You really will. If you do it once, you'll have a great program, but it will expire. After about a year, year and a half, 2 years, the program starts to dwindle a little bit because new risks come up. New things happen, new processes come into play. And if you don't address those new processes and you're addressing the old, the risks are different and the protection models are different. The things you do to protect them are different. In that, don't underestimate the value of outside help. Okay, when you're trying to future-proof, understand that there are consultants that will help you with this model. And I'm not a big person on using consultants, and I'm not a consultant myself, so not an advertisement, right? But when it comes to certain things, don't try to be an expert in everything. If you find a risk that somebody describes that's just outside of your normal toolbox, don't underestimate the value of outside help. People can help you put this model together, and you will still then be relevant. You'll still be the security manager of the year and have one of the best programs out there. So some key takeaways, and I want you to make sure you understand these, okay? Risk and security programs involve as many players as practical, okay? If you don't partner and you don't understand what may be at risk, you're not going to succeed. Again, knowing where the gold is. Knowing the fact that defibrillators have lithium batteries in them and meth heads love those. From the cyber security perspective, do you really know which programs HR uses that are most important to them? Everybody protects the Workday and PeopleSoft, that general program that has every employee's data in it. But is it also the time clock system, which may be operating on a different piece of software that ties into payroll? It may be okay if they don't have my home address for a couple of days because somebody hacked in and erased that data. But if somebody hacks into that payroll system and erases that data, people don't get their paycheck on time. That could be the thing that HR worries about more. And you, as a cybersecurity expert, may think you're protecting that, that central depository, the one that has the most information in it, and that's got to be the most important one because it's biggest. That's not always the case. So again, you have to ask. The security manager leads this effort, but the partners own the effort. They own the risk. As a security manager, you don't own risk. You identify risk, you mitigate risk. You put in the protection so that the risk, it goes down, right? It lowers the risk of something happening to that resource, right? Getting taken, stolen, impaired in some way. But the partners own that risk. And if they don't want to play in this environment, you need to let them know, okay, but I can't take your stuff into consideration in the overall risk profile of this organization if you don't share with me. Identify possible partners, include as many as practical, then reduce them if you don't need them. Right? You don't have to go back and talk to everybody every year if you find out somebody didn't offer you anything in the first year. It's not bad to go back and check with them. Look, we're talking about an annual thing here, right? It's not a big, heavy lift in that regard. And then bundle that risk to find out, are there synergies, right? So protection of the gold was a vault, right? A vault or a safe, and it had to have an alarm system and a camera system. Well, what else might need to have an alarm system and a camera system? Do I have one already in place? Can I tap off of an existing camera system, or is this a brand new thing for my organization? We don't have any cameras at our facility. We're a small site. We don't have much of anything security-wise. Do I need to buy a new one? If I already have existing measures in place, can I capitalize on them and find some synergies? It'll keep your bills low. It'll let you really maximize the stuff you have. And bundling risk makes it so that you're not watching everything individually, but you're looking at it holistically. More key takeaways: the process is never ending. It is that continuous improvement model. Continuous improvement model. You plan, you build, you monitor, you respond. Then you do it all again, right? And if you do it correctly, you can get it onto a cycle where once a year you're going back to redo the plan to make sure it's still valid. You're validating your own work here. Rebuilding if necessary, making adjustments when it comes to year 2 and beyond. Monitoring, again, you know whether something has been impaired or lost or stolen, and then you'll know whether or not your particular mitigation worked, whether it was just a one-off type of failure or whether there is something more you need to do. And then if there's something more you need to do, you do that and go back into the planning phase. Partners will expect help from you in mitigating the risk, okay? And if you want them to help you by telling you what that risk is, right, there's nothing worse than being a security manager and not understanding your business and having nobody tell you anything about it and saying, oh yeah, just go out and secure the place. Well, that's the guys who put up the guards at the gate and the alarms on the outside doors and cameras on the corner and call it good and hide in their office and pray every night that nothing's going to happen. Don't be that person, okay? Partners will help, but they will expect help as well. You'll need to have a process, and we'll talk about that process of getting this information out from them. And you'll need to build solid relationships. Don't go in once a year to talk to somebody who you've alienated the entire year, right? Stick your head in the door and talk to the finance lead once in a while. Go for coffee, have lunch, ask them how the kids are, right? You need to build those relationships as a security manager so that you can be successful. People will not share things with you, especially things that make them nervous. If they tell you, I'm nervous about the gold because we have it over there in that file cabinet, it's got a broken lock on it, and it's just in those jelly jars over there, and I really haven't weighed it lately, so I'm not exactly sure how much we have. No one shares that level of incompetence with you on the first date. Okay? You need to build solid relationships with people so they're not afraid to come and tell you what the risks really are and how they may be exposed, and that way you can help them. So build those relationships. Huge part of this program. So isn't it nice? This week's deliverables, you've got reading, lecture, and a quiz. And if you did things right, you did the reading first, and you just finished the lecture. So isn't that grand? And now you will go on to the quiz. It'll be 10 questions from a question bank. No two students will get exactly the same quiz, so you can work together. You may see the same question. You won't see the answers in the same order. You won't see the questions in the same order. You'll see different questions, perhaps. But it's okay to work together, because I can't stop that, quite frankly. And in working together, you are discussing the material. Do those things in order, though. Each week, I will give you a suggested order of operations. Okay? I guess you don't have to follow it. Let your conscience be your guide again. But if you follow it, you have the highest chance for success in the course. So if I say do the lecture, then do the reading, do it that way. If I say do the reading, then the lecture, do it that way. That's really the secret to success, is to do things in the proper order so that you have the background when you go into the lecture, or you have the background when you start the reading to understand it. And so that's why I put that out there. So I would suggest you look at that and heed that advice. So next week, not this week, but next week, we're going to start looking at the individual departments themselves. So I mentioned a number of them in this lecture, HR and finance and EHS and operations supply chain. We're going to start looking at those individually, what they do for a living, because I think that's important that you understand that. And even if you've worked in industry before, you may find that your particular site, I'm using examples across multiple industries and multiple operating locations. Some places security does background checks on new employees. Most places HR does it. The place you work, security may have done it. But in most organizations, and I think it's around 85%, HR is responsible for that. So we're going to talk about the general organizations and the parts of it so that when you get into that first workplace, you kind of know who's who in the zoo. It's important to me that you understand that you walk in with confidence. So we're going to look at that next week and how the security manager interacts with each one of those partners and how they can impact your success and vice versa. Also next week, not this week, but next week, just giving you a little warning that there'll be a discussion assignment and the initial post will be due on Thursday at 5 p.m. Responses will be due Sunday at midnight, as most work is normally due. But in order for people to respond to a post, you have to have an initial post. So just know that next week, way ahead of time, letting you know, plan your time so that you don't have to worry about that. And here are the references, and by the way, these references are in at least as much as PowerPoint allows me to put them in APA style, which is what the references on your final paper will be. So get used to seeing them this way. If you have any questions for any of the authors listed, any of the references I use in lectures, please let me know, because I normally either know them or have reached out to them before I've used them in a lecture to ask them if it's okay if students contact them, or if they want me to bring them questions directly, because if they're not willing to work with us, then we don't want to work with their stuff either. So that is it for this week. The lecture came in at 35 minutes, essentially. Please reach out if you have questions. Again, the reading, the lecture you just finished. Now it's on to the quiz, and then we will go on to week 3 after that. See you around.